So why they call it a Bluetooth, not like a red or a green tooth? You're an IT.
I think it has to do with like the color of the waves. There are blue waves that transmit the data. Also,
is it blue? Like when you're talking, or all the time there's just blue waves emitting from your ears?
All the time there are blue waves emitting from the electronics which connect to your ears.
So every time you tell me your ear pods aren't working, the blue is off. Does that mean it's yeller?
It could be yeller. It could be red because it's not working.
Or clear, because there ain't shit going on when it's clear.
Bluetooth technology was named after a Danish king, King Harald Blatant, who had a penchant for snacking on blueberries and was known for uniting warring factions in what is now Denmark, Norway, and Sweden.
So it was blamed on blueberries.
Yeah.
Well,
I thought it was named after your blue balls, but that's a different story. Everyone, my name is John Edwards, and with me is Zeke Baker, and together we make the Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for making us a part of your day. Before we get started here, we have a jam-packed show with awesome people that are here in the studio. Want to let you know we are sponsored by CaskCartel.com, changing the industry standard of how you receive your alcohol. They are like the Amazon of the spirits industry. So you go on to Cask Cartel, they hook you up with a merchant just like they would if you went to Amazon.com and you wanted a new phone or wanted a new computer or TV. They are going to find you merchants that are going on to Cask Cartel that have alcohol for you to buy, whether or not it's gin, whether or not it's tequila, mezcal, bourbon, whiskey, scotch, whatever it is, Cask Cartel has it. Go to caskcartel.com, changing the industry standard, and get liquor shipped directly to your door. Zeke, I also want to let everyone know that all of our glassware is provided by distilleryproducts.com. Once a closely guarded secret that only the distilleries know about, now people know distilleryproducts.com is a place where you can go get wholesale glassware laser etched at affordable prices, and they are some of the greatest people to work with. So whether or not you need Glencairns, you need the Irish whiskey glass, the Tua, or you need neat glasses engraved, you have decanters, whatever it is, go to distilleryproducts.com. Check them out. If you want me to hook you up with them, I am more than happy to play matchmaker. Feel free to send me a message and I will get you in touch with the good folks at distilleryproducts.com. Hi, Zeke.
Hello, John.
Now that we got through all the formalities, we have two amazing people on the show today. We have Dr. Pat Heist from Wilderness Trail, along with brand manager extraordinaire.
Yeah, that'll work. Sure.
Jerod Smith. Yeah. Both from Wilderness Trail. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming. Zeke has a look on his face like he's pissed at me.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I was thinking about something that it slipped my mind and I can't get to come back now, so.
This would have been awesome for the cold open rather than Bluetooth shit.
Sorry, it's the best I had. Every time I talk to you, you went out, like, sorry, my AirPods went out again, blah, 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 must be the Bluetooth. And so I was like, well, what does Bluetooth even stand for?
I feel like that's a conversation that Jerod and Pat are not having.
I'm actually surprised you didn't know that, about the Bluetooth being an IT.
I mean IT, but how often?
Even if you look at the Bluetooth symbol, it's runes, like, you know, right?
I knew it was a rune, but I didn't know exactly what. It actually said this in the...
Speaking of things you didn't know, you know how like you can send a picture to somebody on the iPhone?
Yeah.
And if you hold down the send button, it gives you all the options, like you can like spray the screen with it. Did that to him today. He's like, how do you do that? I'm like, oh man. I knew a simple trick that John didn't, and he's the IT guy.
Derived from the old Danish runes of H and B. So you learn something new every day.
Like H-E-B groceries?
That store is awesome. It's like Meijer. For those of you that are in Kentucky listening to this, the Meijer is pretty close to the H-E-B. It's like Walmart. It's like a super Walmart that has the grocery store part of it. That's kind of...
Super Walmarts have groceries.
I know, that's what I'm saying. The super Walmart that has the groceries, because not every Walmart has a grocery.
Even the green ones have food now. And they're small.
But the green ones are specific to food.
No, they have other stuff.
I feel like we're wasting their time. We got to get to whiskey, but we have Dr. Pat and Jerod here. Wilderness Trail has been around for a lot longer than people think, although the physical distillery might have been around a little bit shorter. Firm Solutions was something, Pat, that you had been working on for a very, very long time. So tell everybody what you were doing and kind of how the distillery came to be, because you weren't a new name to the bourbon industry when you all of a sudden decided to build a distillery.
Yep. So a little bit of background there. Myself and my business partner, Shane Baker, we actually used to play in a rock band together in Danville, where the distillery is located. And my background is in microbiology, biochemistry. Shane's background is he's got a good business background. He's a mechanical engineer. And, back in the band days, we, did a lot of talking about different things, did a lot of, drinking a lot of bourbon and different things. And, when it came time to start Firm Solutions, using my microbiology background and Shane's engineering background, we came together and started that company. And what we do is we market yeast, enzymes, and other fermentation products to hundreds of distilleries. And, that's kind of how we got our start.
Some people source whiskey, but some people can also source yeast.
We have evaluated most yeasts that are out there in the market, and we do business with a lot of the different distilleries out there. So we have a fairly deep understanding of, what strains are different distilleries using, and then how do those strains compare and contrast from one distillery to the next.
Did you go back and look at any of the old Seagram stuff? From what I understand, they had quite, the team that really went in and developed yeast, and they had, a few guys that was their, sole focus.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't say that I have any examples of exactly Seagram's things that we've looked at. And the other part of it is we do maintain a fairly high level of confidentiality with companies that we have done business with. But, just kind of speaking in general, we do have a pretty good wide breadth of knowledge, across the different distilleries and what different people are doing.
So how nuanced? We know with whiskey you can get super nuanced on the barrel type to if you're using a staves after you're doing a finishing, but like the mash bill, what type of corn are you using? Or, is it red? Is it yellow? Is it white? Are things malted? Or are they not malted? Or are you cooking it before you put it in? Are you mixing the mash all together? Or are you cooking it separately at first? And there's a whole bunch of variables there. How much variable is actually there for the yeast? Well, I'll just give you a good example. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been involved with training with probably 3 or 4 different distilleries. And one of the exercises that we like to do is to have basically, let's say, 10 different flasks with the same mash bill in them. And then we put different yeast across all those different flasks. So that really the only difference between each flask is actually the yeast strain. And, in the different, just like I said, in the last few weeks, just looking at the results that we've gotten from the classes that we've taught, some people could pick out the difference between one yeast to the next. And again, this is smelling the fermentation. This isn't actually, the distillate. So at the fermentation stage, some people can guess that, hey, this is a different yeast than the one here to the left. Other people can't. And so at the fermentation stage, it is it's very subtle. So the yeast isn't going to completely change the profile of a whiskey. It's going to give a very subtle, a subtle difference between one to the next. Now, when you get to the distillate part, that's where you start
picking out more specific notes because, again, you're concentrating that distillate down. And so you start getting more of, fruity notes, very specific fruity notes, for example. And so at the distillate phase, you can start then picking those strains out. But it's not night and day difference. If you switch the yeast strain out, it's not going to be a night and day difference with the distillate. It's very subtle. I mean, all the yeast that are used to produce distilled spirits are all the same species of yeast. They're all Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the scientific name for the yeast. It's the same species of yeast that's used for beer, wine, distilled spirits, and bread making. So it's all the same species. So they're already very similar. Mm-hmm. So there's just slight nuances between the different strains.
I always figured it was, kind of akin to like when a baby's born. Most babies all look pretty similar. Then they get a little time, months become years, and as the age goes on, then you see more characteristics develop, and it's more of a foundation thing that you probably can't tell a difference of at the get-go. But as the product moves further out, from that inception, then it becomes much more noticeable. Oh yeah, here's what we did with this one, and here's what we did with that one, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, human babies are actually the result of sexual intercourse, and yeast are most often the result of asexual reproduction. So there's another very unique difference.
Well, and if the yeast is present there, you're probably not going to yield a child.
It always gets me back to my favorite Seinfeld episode. One of them, the one with the ugly baby. They always go, I've said this already on the podcast, so I'll make it quick, but they go over and they just go, well, he's something. And they don't say like, oh, he's ugly or he's good looking. Oh, he's something, all right. The parents are like, yeah, he really is. It's a lot of babies out there, but not all of them are always going to look as good as some of the other ones. Kind of like yeast. I have no idea what makes one yeast better than the other. Like, why is the salty saccharide better than I know I butchered that, but why is that one better than another type of yeast, and what is even the name of another type of yeast?
So some other differences between one way to think about yeast in terms of whiskey is how does one yeast strain impart flavor to one whiskey versus how does another strain impart flavor to another. But there are actually a lot of production-based attributes that we want to look at as well. I mean, in distilled spirits production, one thing that you want out of a yeast strain is for it to finish all the sugar in fermentation. Because, if we were making beer, we might want to have a yeast that leaves behind a little bit of sugar. And that way you have kind of a sweeter beer versus a very dry beer from a strain that uses up all the sugar. Well, in distilled spirits production, any sugar that's left over after fermentation is pretty much money left on the table. That's grain that you paid for that you didn't get any alcohol from. So that's something outside of flavor that we look at with yeast strains is its ability to finish that sugar. Then secondary to that is the ability to finish all that sugar in what period of time, and under what other conditions. So, for example, will that yeast finish a fermenter in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? What temperature do I have to have? Do I have to crank the temperature down to 70 degrees to keep the yeast alive? Or can I run that fermenter at 90 degrees? And so all these different factors play into how long are you going to have to be tying up a fermenter to get the tank done. And then, obviously what flavors are going to go into that. And also utilities. How cool do I have to keep that fermenter? That kind of gets back to, energy requirements. So there's a lot of different factors to do with the yeast outside of just flavor.
You just wrecked it. Now there's more variables.
Yeah.
There's even more variables.
It's just a rabbit hole that keeps spiraling.
I love it. I mean, and one of the things that people always say, the barrel is the part that imparts 65% of the flavor. So all of this science to distilling, to the mash bill, to the yeast, to every last detail about the distilling process and distilling a spirit, it's just for 35%. you know that you're putting in your time, the distiller's putting in their time, and they might be following things that you are telling them to do, but all of that time is really just 35% of the overall picture.
Well, I think, another way to phrase that would be, let's just say that everybody in this room agrees that 65% of the flavor comes from the barrel. Well, rather than saying 65% of the flavor comes from the barrel, maybe a better way to say it would be 65% of the flavor is facilitated by barrel aging, because there are a lot of things that are produced by the yeast in fermentation that will play a role in how that chemistry develops during barrel aging. For example, you have organic acids that are produced by the yeast. Acetic acid is one of those. There are organic acids produced by contaminating bacteria in that batch as well. And if you think about, just asking the question to you guys, what is a family of chemicals that is tied in with flavor? Like if you can just name a chemical family that has to do with flavor, can you name me a chemical family that has to do with flavor?
I'll go with phenols.
Okay, that's good. How about esters?
I know what those
are. We familiar with that?
Bit.
Esters?
There are only 2 people at this table that are doctors, and one of them is not me.
Or it's been a long time since it's organic.
Mm-hmm. So anyhow, just to kind of get what I was going for there. So yeast produce organic acids. Organic acids condense with alcohols to form esters in the barrel aging process. So there are chemicals that are produced by the yeast in fermentation that come over in the distillate that will then change over time to form these flavors. It's not like the esters are just coming out of the barrel. They are being produced by a combination of the conditions of what's going on inside of that barrel, as well as the chemistry that's going on between yeast-produced metabolites and alcohols.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was picturing in my head as you were speaking on it earlier. Was, if you're going to give the wood the 65%, but there's still the yeast that's almost the catalyst that's going to drive a lot of those reactions. So even if it has a lesser role, so to speak, on the get-go, what in turn it yields on the back end is going to be exponentially, bigger piece of the pie, even though it's not getting the credit for it, so to speak.
Well, the yeast makes 100% of all the alcohol that's in there, so that's quite a bit of the credit right there, Take the alcohol out of whiskey, what do you got left?
Nothing. Unsweet tea.
Yep.
I guess if you leave a little bit of sugar in there at the very end, maybe you will get sweet tea. You'd never know, though.
I said unsweet.
I know, but he was just talking about if we don't distill all that stuff in there, then there'd be nothing to... all that sugar would stay there. They haven't actually taken all that sugar out.
Sugar would actually stay behind in the stillage and be essentially worthless.
I pay attention.
Some days.
I have a more important question. What instrument do you play?
Actually, growing up, I used to play trombone, believe it or not. But in the band that Shane and I had, I was the lead singer.
So you were the lead singer, and then what did Shane play?
Shane was the lead guitar player.
So if you ever need a shitty rhythm guitarist, I played in bands, and I actually played covers in bars in Lexington to get through
He's been
college.
pushing it hard lately. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's come up. It's actually come up, but I'm fine. What type of music did y'all play?
We played a combination of original and cover tunes, and in terms of the covers we played was like, Stone Temple Pilots and bands like that.
So if you have Sirius XM radio, it would be anything that's on the Lithium channel.
Anything on the Lithium channel, probably 90s rock. I wish we could say that we played more Hair Nation, but
no, I mean, like I think of
look at John. He hates Hair Nation.
I wish I could be on Hair Nation.
Facial Hair Nation.
And just digressing here for a second, the thing that I love about 90s music is like you got that Eddie Vedder, 7 Mary 3, like I have become like
The y'all.
Yeah, did you
Jarl or whatever.
Did you do any of that where you kind of sing from the back of your throat? Or are you like channeling your inner Eddie Vedder? Where it's like,
Yeah, I mean, you know, whenever I do cover tunes, I try to nail it as much as, you know, make it sound as much like the original singer as possible. I'm not one to do my own version of something. I want it to sound, you know, as much like the song that everybody's used to hearing. So yeah, I would try to do everything possible. All the all that crap.
She said, yeah.
Haunting me.
Like you could just sing sounds that sound somewhat close to what a word would be, and you could sing Pearl Jam.
I was always confused. I forget the song, but he's describing a woman's body. And he says, all 5 horizons in front of me as her body once was. I cannot look at a woman at any angle and see 5 different horizons. Like I really...
That's black.
I know. I've thought about this a lot, to be honest. Like no lie. I can't figure that out. It bothers me.
It does?
Yeah.
It's haunting. Familiar yet.
No angle, clothed, nude, whatever. I can't figure out the 5 horizons. I've tried. It's bothered me for over a decade now.
Well, and the best part of that song is when all of a sudden he's like, ooh, like it goes from like the gnarl to like the deep. Yeah.
That's when he stubbed his toe.
So y'all were in a band. You have a background in microbiology. He has a background in mechanical engineering. What then made you decide to go whiskey? Is it that, you know, did you grow up in Kentucky? Was it one of those things where bourbon is all around you guys and you were like, well, shoot, I think we could do something really good here. It's kind of what we know and what, you know, our environment is like. How'd that work out?
Well, I think it's multifaceted. You know, first of all, you know, anyone who grows up in Kentucky has got some connection to the bourbon industry. Shane, his grandmother actually was an employee for the Kentucky River Distillery and ended up becoming the Stitzel-Weller Distillery. So she actually worked from, I believe, the time she was 14 years old until she retired. So she started off there close to Danville, where we're at, working for Kentucky River Distilling, and then went on to retire in Shively at the Stitzel-Weller Distillery. I think she was in her 60s. So, you know, there's that family history there. But, you know, if you look at when we started Firm Solutions, which was been about 2006, there was actually a lot of, I mean, that was the kind of the height of a major economic downturn, which, you know, wasn't the best time to be starting a business. But we were actually very successful, luckily. But, you know, around that time, and looking at the types of distilleries, you know, as yeast providers, you know, if you're in business with anything, you want to sell as much as what your products that you have as possible. And around 2006, 2007, the federal government was shaping up what is called the Renewable Fuel Standard. And it's where they basically mandated an increase of production of fuel alcohol for fuel. So, you know, if you go to the pumps, what makes a gas from regular to mid-grade to super unleaded is the amount of ethyl alcohol in there. So that ethyl alcohol is what boosts the octane, and that's made here domestically. So about 10 to 15% of all the fuel used here in the United States is domestically produced fuel alcohol. So being a yeast provider, do you want to get a distillery that has a 20,000 gallon fermenter, or do you want to get a distillery that has a 1.2 million gallon fermenter? So we kind of went after a fuel alcohol, and that's kind of was around the time the government was mandating increased production of fuel ethanol.
Because of that, are you able to then kind of make your own gas? I feel like you could do it. It might be $4 at the pump, but that secret sauce that's making it go from what they buy a bottle of crude, and not to get too deep, we don't talk politics here, but I will talk socioeconomics all day. You could go buy a barrel of crude oil, and then with your expertise you could probably distill what the final product would be for a heck of a lot cheaper than $4 a gallon if it ever goes up that high, right?
I mean, you know, that's debatable. That's kind of getting a little bit outside of our area of expertise, but
I'm just checking. I mean, I need to know who to call if gas goes up over $4 a gallon.
Oh, yeah, we can help you out.
Get a Tesla at that point.
All right, so you and Shane started going for the fuels. What then made you go whiskey?
Okay, so, I mean, we didn't just...
Well, not just.
Yeah.
So y'all started going for the fuel.
Yeah. Those were the larger customers.
Got to put food on the table.
That's right.
Well, they probably pay better than some craft distillery down the road.
Well, and at that time, you know, the craft distilling movement was, you know, non-existent compared to what it is now. So kind of an advantage with starting over on the fuel side, outside of the volumes of yeast and other products that they use, is that fuel alcohol distilleries are highly sophisticated compared to beverage alcohol distilleries. I mean, they've got, you know, they have to make a profit getting much less on a gallon of whiskey than what we can get over on the beverage side. So in order to maximize their profitability, they have to use very sophisticated technologies and lab testing and all these different techniques to really dial in their production. So they're maximizing, getting every drop of alcohol per bushel of grain that they possibly can. So that helped us to kind of take some of that technology from fuel alcohol and bring it over to beverage alcohol distilleries. So kind of introduce some of that high-tech, you know, production techniques over to our beverage alcohol customers. And so we just kind of bridged that gap. So the laboratory that we have at Firm Solutions does things very highly sophisticated like they would do in a fuel alcohol plant. And we try to help beverage alcohol distilleries sort of, you know, become more of that sophisticated, give that sophisticated look at the process. Whereas, you know, some of these older distilleries, especially if you look at some of the traditional beverage alcohol, you know, bourbon producers in Kentucky, some of those are using, you know, 100-plus-year-old techniques. And some of the distilleries are over 100 years old. So, you know, they're not really highly sophisticated. Even though they're owned by multi-billion-dollar companies, they're not as sophisticated as what they could be.
Well, I mean, shoot, there's people, quote-unquote, losing barrels left and right. Not everything's sophisticated, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, keeping track of a barrel, that's probably harder to do than to have a good fermentation. I don't know, arguably.
Yeah, so where did the when did the gears turn to let's switch from just Firm Solutions to
transition over Wilderness Trail?
Yes, sir.
So, you know, we started Firm Solutions in 2006. About 2011-ish, we started really, first of all, by that point in time, we had begun doing a lot of training for beverage alcohol distilleries as well as fuel alcohol distilleries. So how could we do a better job with the training that we were doing? You know, we had a laboratory, we had a lecture, we could do everything, but we couldn't legally distill. So incorporating a small distillery made sense from a training standpoint. Mm-hmm. We're bringing all these people in, training them. Well, it would be nice if we had a distillery, and that way we could actually take them through all steps of the process. So we started off with a small 250-gallon pot still, which in a long day, we could make 1 barrel of bourbon. So we started off that way. And again, it was kind of like, you know, this will be a good tool for us to use for training. And then, you know, we started making a few barrels and started doing the math. I was like, shit, man, we can't have a meaningful brand making 1 barrel of whiskey a day. So it just made sense to expand. And I think our first expansion beyond 1 barrel a day was to a 1-shift operation on an 18-inch diameter Vendome beer column still. So we went from pot still to a beer column, and that setup gives us about 12 to 13 barrels in a shift. So we started off with that in 1 shift, and then we started adding shifts to that. And then about a year ago, we finished our third expansion. So we're also one of the only distilleries that I know of that expanded 3 times before releasing our first bottle. But, maybe another detrimental business plan there. But about a year ago, we finished a third expansion, added a 36-inch diameter Vendome beer column that took us up to 220 barrels a day.
This might be a personal question. You don't necessarily need to answer it, but considering the fact that you guys were profitable and had another business first, did you then need to take on a lot of outside investments when it came to the distillery? Because I just find it interesting that you have not only the distillery, but a few expansions right away. Was it something that you guys were like, all right, we're in it to win it, it's our money, it's our kind of business that we've grown from Firm Solutions to become Wilderness Trail? Or was it something where you guys kind of had to go for some help too?
No, we actually basically cashing the paychecks over on the Firm Solutions side to fund the Wilderness Trail side. So we actually never brought in any outside investments.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's going to be a heck of a lot better when certain things, if anything changes down the line, as I'm sure it will, because there's some great stuff here. So my hat's off to you in advance.
Thank you.
I noticed that the side of your bottle said sweet mash instead of sour mash. What made you decide to go sweet mash over sour mash? I mean, I think the only other place that we know that really advertises sweet mash is Peerless.
Mm-hmm. So, there's a quote that we often will bring up, and that quote is that consistency is the mark of a pro. I don't know who said that originally. Maybe it was Parker Beam. That's kind of who comes into my mind, somebody like that. But consistency is the mark of a pro, and what they mean is, consistency. I mean, you want to make a good whiskey consistently. And to be considered a professional in bourbon production, you want to have good consistency. And if you look at all the different things that go into a whiskey recipe, for example, the grains, the water, the yeast strain, I mean, those things should be fairly consistent from day to day, providing you're sourcing your ingredients properly. Well, the one thing, and this is again coming from experience of working with literally over 1,000 different distilleries, one thing that we know through working with distilleries is the one thing that is not consistent from day to day is the back set. That's the leftovers after distillation that you would recycle back to make a sour mash. So if our goal is to produce a very consistent product, then why would I want to include an ingredient that is not consistent on a day-by-day basis? So that's one reason why we decided to go with sweet mash. Another reason, if you ask, sour mash producers, why do you use back set? Why do you use the sour mash process? The answer that you'll most often get, and I think you'd probably agree with this, is they say because it makes it more consistent. And
that's when you lost me just saying.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say. That's what they say. And then you kind of get deeper into that. It's like, well, what does back set actually do for you? It acidifies the mash, okay? So if you take the pH of the mash down, you definitely will decrease the potential for microbial contamination. You don't eliminate it, but you can decrease it. So you sort of give yourself a little bit of wiggle room with respect to microbial contamination. Now, why would we want to put ourselves at risk for a little more bacterial contamination by doing the sweet mash process? We're freaking Firm Solutions. So we got Firm Solutions capabilities in the laboratory right there on site. So if anybody we're the world's, one of the premier companies that companies call when they have bacterial contamination issues. So we're able to deal with that. So we weren't afraid to do the sweet mash with respect to opening ourselves up for the potential of microbial contamination. So, there's other reasons why you would or would not want to do a sour mash. And most great whiskeys that are produced in Kentucky are made with sour mash recipes. So we're not trying to say sweet mash is better than sour mash. It's just, when we put our stake in the ground, how can we differentiate ourselves? And that's just one of the ways that we do that.
Was there a lot of pressure having the background that you have and having that knowledge and having trained all these people before, a lot of people say those who can't do teach, those that can do are off there doing it. I mean, you are in a sense putting your money where your mouth is, literally and figuratively, to now make your own product. How much pressure was there to move to that role in the distillery?
Well, at the time that we, started the distillery, one of the reasons we started it is because, I guess one day we just kind of woke up and was like, okay, wait a second. We're sitting here taking phone calls from some of the most famous, master distillers or whatever in the industry, and we're helping them with their issues. So we had a lot of confidence that, not only did we know all the different ways not to run a distillery, because again, we're engaging with these hundreds of different distilleries on technical consulting and troubleshooting issues. We already knew many ways, many things you don't want to do. And then also we did learn a lot of best practices. So you can exclude all the bad ideas we've seen and incorporate all the good ideas we've seen, and then incorporate that into our own unique ideas, my background in microbiology, biochemistry, Shane's background in process design and engineering. So we were actually very confident. I don't think there was ever a moment where we doubted that we could make excellent whiskey, because again, we're answering phone calls from some of the other professionals out in the industry.
A simple question. Where'd you come up with Wilderness Trail? Admittedly, I asked because in countless messages, WT will pop up, and the first thing that comes to my head is Wild Turkey, and then no, Wilderness Trail, and it's led to a lot of confusion. I will admit that, but I just wonder where the name came from.
It's better than people that call Belle Meade BM. If you're talking about Belle Meade bourbon, this is just a PSA right now. Please use BMB.
I'm pretty sure there's context clues that know if you're talking about a BM or not.
Just use BMB, because
that's an extra letter. It's a lot
everything that people say, I just want to say something back to. Like, Zeke will send me a text.
It's called a context clue.
It's a context clue, but it's like, just use BMB.
But when somebody says, hey, I'm going for a pick at WT, that's a little different.
This is very recent, because you all weren't doing picks until about a year ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zeke, what if someone said, it's late at night, I'm going to have a BM before I go to bed?
If you're talking
right?
Yeah, there he comes for 40 minutes. We haven't got Jerod to say anything, and he comes in with the best thing said all night.
I would admittedly say it depends on who you're talking to. If it came from me, you might be really confused.
So, the similarity between our initials and other famous distilleries, we're definitely happy to be in that same family there. But, we started off as Wilderness Trail Distillery, and the Wilderness Trail is actually the path that Daniel Boone and other settlers took through the Cumberland Gap to settle the area where our distillery is located. Okay. We're actually located along what's known as the Wilderness Trail, Wilderness Trace, the Wilderness Road. So we're right there.
Gotcha. No, I honestly had no clue. But I wouldn't say it irked me, but it does throw a curveball at times when you're in a deep message thread with a group of people like, WT, oh yeah, we talk. Oh, hold on. Come on, you're confusing me again.
Yeah, that worked in our favor early on, very early on in our Twitter days. That we would get a lot of mentions meant for Wild Turkey, but we would get that for us, and of course we would take it.
Of course.
At WT Distillery is what our handle is. So yeah.
Well, I heard somebody. We were talking about different whiskeys earlier at dinner tonight, and somebody mentioned Buffalo Trail. So I thought
I've heard that too.
That's a poetic justice there.
It kind of gets to be a blur, with multiple factors involved.
Yeah. We're happy to be a part of any mistake so long as it benefits us.
Yeah. So moving on to the juice, we've got a few options here. Honestly, I'm not sure if that's all the different mashes you guys have, but let's move through those a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So Jarrett's over there pouring our single barrel bottled in bond wheated bourbon. So that is a recipe with 64% corn, 24% wheat, 12% malted barley. And again, that's a single barrel bottled in bond. And that's what he poured, and that's what we're smelling and drinking right now.
Yeah, this barrel here yielded us 249 bottles at 100 proof.
Ooh, it's a solid yield for 4 years.
Yeah, it's my first taste of this barrel specifically, and it's good nose on it.
Now, what made you pick the mash bills you did? Mm-hmm. You know, is there something from your expertise and your what you've been doing that made you think that 60%, 64% corn and all that is the right way to go?
Mm-hmm.
Or?
Well, I mean, if you look again, when you're looking at, or when we were looking to put our stake in the ground, what's going to differentiate us from, the other distilleries. I think we've always been seeking to make the best bourbon in the world. And when we look at the recipes for some of the, top selling bourbons, a lot of the corn amounts are way up in the 70s, And if you're going to make a financial decision about, increasing profitability, the corn is the cheapest grain in the grain bill. It's got the most starch in it normally. So the more corn you have in your recipe, the cheaper your recipe is going to be, and the more alcohol that you can get out of it. So, again, when we put our stake in the ground, we wanted to have more of an old style traditional recipe. As I mentioned before, Shane, his grandmother, used to be part of Stitzel-Weller Distillery. And if you look back at some of those mash bills, going back when, that distillery was making some of the most famous whiskeys in the world, that's more reflective about what they're making. So I think it really just follows our desire to make the best whiskey in the world. And we believe that the flavor is in the smaller grains. So we want more of the smaller grains like wheat, rye, malted barley, and less of the corn.
I know Zeke likes that you said that.
So you a fan of the middle grains?
I like a little malted barley here and there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's necessary, and I know it's necessary for enzymatic reactions.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it just adds something to the profile that if it's not there, I don't generally like it. I will say, wheaters, for whatever reason, I don't pick up as well.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. There's plenty of folks that...
It just takes longer, too, right? Like, if you get a 4 or 5 year wheated whiskey and you're like, this probably needs about 6, 7, 8 years. At least to get to... And I don't even know that many wheaters that have gone 10, 12. Like, there's a lot of people that get wheaters out early, with the exception of William LaRue Weller and the BTAC collection and... those highly allocated wheaters and pappies and
wheat very well. Like I'll tell folks, like, more times than not when folks say a wheater's fair to good, my impression's less, and I just know it going in. Like, sorry, me and that grain don't just jive too well for whatever.
An analogy that I use is that the wheat kind of gives you an open window to the barrel. And so the barrel comes through more with wheated whiskeys early on. And young wood can be offensive. There's things about young, that young barrel flavor that cut through in a wheat that are kind of covered up by the spiciness of rye. So the wheat kind of is an open window to that barrel flavor. And so I think that's one reason why it just takes, a little bit extra time.
Which is funny because everybody kind of says, like, the barley that's going to make things a little more mellow but a little more palatable across the whole thing. You're not going to have that, like, super spicy part of it. You're not going to have that cornbread part of it. Like, it just, barley is an equalizer.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about corn being the cheapest grain in the mash bill and having the most starch. The malt is actually the most expensive grain in the mash bill and arguably has the least amount of starch. So from a production standpoint, there's reasons why like money reasons why you would or wouldn't have more or less.
So if I'm trying to lose weight, though, my goal is to probably pick one that has more malt than one that has more corn, right?
Depends on if that's going to make you drink more of it or not, I guess, if your goal is to lose weight.
It's called water, John.
Touche.
Yeah. And while your malt might cover up some of those mistakes too, it also leads to a lot of uniformity, though. You know what I mean? It just kind of tastes the same.
Yeah, well,
You know what I mean?
and what I'm curious about is, just to digress here for a second again. So Zeke and I are pretty much opposites for so many different reasons. And, and I can tell that, obviously, you're a very smart man. You're calculating and thinking things. Is Shane that way? Or is it kind of a yin and a yang?
There's a little bit of yin and yang going on. We have slightly different personalities, but Shane and I are great friends. Anytime you have a partnership like that, and you guys.
I hate Zeke, but I love Zeke. That type, and I'm sure it's vice versa. It's not a one-way thing.
Yeah. Sometimes me and Shane will get on a conference call. And the person on the other end of the phone doesn't know which one of us is talking at any given time because we've hung around with each other so much. We almost talk the same. And
we don't have that problem.
Yeah, we do. So,
the problem is they both get on the call and they're like, hey, there's your Horizon song again, see? So you have a little bit of balance, though, right?
Oh yeah.
That you all have been around. That's the thing that I find funny is just the dynamics of people that work together. I always talk about like Charlie and Andy Nelson, and I don't know how much time you've spent with them.
A good bit.
When I did a podcast with them, and I was in there with the conference room with them, and I'm like, it's like, I find it very interesting. You guys are the total yin and yang. And this is one of the reasons why we do things in person, because you're not going to get this from a Skype or anything else. And yes, they're in Nashville, so we'd be really lazy if we didn't do it in person. But they wear their watches on different hands. So one wears their watch on the left hand, one wears their watch on the right hand. And then if you think about their personalities, yin and yang, and they come
one
together.
left-handed.
That's a great question, but at the same time,
It's irrelevant to the story.
one is extremely analytical and one is extremely extroverted, and you put them together and they make the perfect person. And that's why one is more focused on distilling and one is more focused on going around telling people about. Not saying that analytical people can't come out and tell the story very, very well.
Let me give the outsider take on someone that's not the person giving an answer on himself. But him and Shane are actually very similar. I think they're both very driven. They're both kind of that type A, both people person. There are different similarities, but you would think there's more that yin and the yang would make the partnership work. But like Pat mentioned, they're also like best friends. So I think that's what makes it work more. It's like just two guys that have a lot in common, and that's what makes it work more than the balancing act of it.
Congratulations, you earned your raise today.
Yeah, nice.
All right, so let's talk
Didn't
about
even
the
bet
booze. Let's get back to some fun stuff here.
Well, I think everything has been fun, but we just got through this one that I find.
We didn't get through it. Nobody's talked about it. That's why I said let's get back to it.
Let's
Nobody
talk
said buy
about
it or bar it.
See?
I almost think even though it's a low corn, I get the corn on it. Like there's hints of it that are there, but it's more like a cooked corn. And as a fat guy, I really like that. Like it's like a little bit of cornbread to it. And I know I'm oversimplifying a lot of this, but for 64% corn, it's not corn like Tennessee distillery corn profile that Zeke can immediately identify. It's
Our sawdust.
there are hints of corn in here that are in a nice way. I don't know if you are all getting that too.
No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, you know, besides just a couple things relative to our grains that I'll mention to you is, first of all, we source all of our corn and our wheat and our rye actually from a local farm there in Danville. So, you know, we're going to get the nuances of kind of the terroir of what that particular farm has to offer.
That word.
The other thing about the specific farmer that we deal with, they're actually a seed farmer. So they keep all the varieties separate. So we have a very unique opportunity to do mashes with single varieties of each of these grains. So, you know, how much does that contribute to the uniqueness of our bourbons? I mean, is it more the fact where it's grown, the varieties? But we also have a very different mashing process. So the temperature at which we're cooking our grains, how we introduce our grains into the mash, how we are introducing heat into our cooker. I mean, there's a lot of different factors just kind of around those things that would impart the flavor that you're getting out of our bourbon.
And we would love to take your class and podcast it, because this is something we could probably talk about for hours and hours and hours. But I get a lot of the malt on this too.
12% malted barley.
For some things that have come out recently that have been very, very high malt, like Chattanooga whiskey or Old Elk or things like that, I almost get as much malt on the profile on this one as I would on some of the other ones. And I think it just kind of goes, and I'm going to say a word that people hate, it kind of goes to the general smoothness for me. I know you're not allowed to say that word, but I think a higher malt presence makes for a very easy drinker, in a nice way of putting it. But what do you think, Zeke?
I picked up, like you said, a fair amount of the corn. And again, it wasn't, sawdust corn by any means, but these days in the market, there's such a preconceived notion that when you tell somebody they're drinking a wheater, it puts you behind the eight ball almost. I mean, you're in a stance of, shit, this better be really damn good, or our folks are going to knock it even more than you pour it to them blind, or just said, hey, try this whiskey. And I think, unfortunately, that's really where the market is and where people are. If you just try to, keep your pulse on where drinkers are, so to speak.
Well, and we're foolproof and OWA and...
Well, yeah, but then they're...
Yeah, you say wheater, they expect taste just like that.
But those are lackluster now. They're not giving enough time in the barrel. They're barely 7 years. We've talked about it, but in general, that's just where we are now as a consensus, I think, as far as a buildup of, you hear wheated mash, you just expect something, even if you don't know what it is. Like, it's going to wow me. I don't know why, but they said wheated. It's going to be damn good.
Yeah.
And kind of we talked about it, I think they just need a certain amount of time. My only, I guess, question would be, in your mind, where do you put the mark, so to speak, on how far a wheater really needs to go to have that necessary age?
Well, there's how far would a weeder need to go, and then how far does our weeder need to go?
Not necessarily the best phrase question.
Well,
I apologize.
We're nearing. Actually, we're just now into 6-year-old on our wheated bourbons, and we're definitely seeing a kind of a turning the corner from the 5-year to the 6-year. 4-year going to the 5-year. I mean, there was a little bit of differences, but getting into the 6-year, and again, we're only into a certain number of barrels, and I think we're planning on doing a age state at 6-year in the spring once we're into a good bit of 6-year-old barrels. But when we get to that point, we'll have more information on because we can't really comment until we get the data, and so we're just now getting into 6 years. So, yeah. So we're really looking forward to seeing how it gets, 7-year, 8-year.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, based on what other experts have said, and in what Shane and I have discussed, and other members of our team, 7 to 8 years is kind of a really sweet spot for wheated bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting close, at least as close as you can to that 8 mark these days. That's where you just have to get to. But at the same time, you have to understand, as a consumer, you have to kind of grasp. It's tough to have, being a small startup and juice just sitting in the barrel and people wanting to put it out and saying, no, even if you like it, let's just think about this. Let's give it a little more time. Let it sit a little bit longer. I know you want to pull it, but we'd rather get to, a certain spot. I mean, it's got to be a juxtaposition to be in as far as, well, we're going to pay you for the barrel now. Well, we get it. Mm-hmm. And we want that check probably, but we're going to sit here for a minute.
But I have to think it was unique for Pat and Shane and the crew over at Wilderness Trail. They're still getting income from Firm Solutions. So Zeke, say you and I go start a distillery. We're like, all right, well, shit, we spent X amount of dollars for these barrels, and then we got to get them out at some point because we need to start getting money in. Mm-hmm. If you think about it from a business solution, as long as you guys were paying the rent, all the profit is going back into the business knowing that it's a long haul.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So where some people are throwing 1 year, 2 year, 3 year whiskey out, you all have the luxury of sitting back and going, all right, hey, if this goes 8, 9 years, it goes 8, 9 years. If this goes 7, 8 years, it goes 7, 8 years. But there's no timetable. We're going to taste it and figure out when it's good. Mm-hmm. That has to be a unique position.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking to some of the historians, looking at other brands, even since Prohibition, arguably we may be the only distillery to, either A, didn't source somebody else's juice, or B, didn't put out something less than a 4-year-old. So, it is kind of a very unique situation, and definitely we're able to kind of sit back because of the financial situation with our Firm Solutions business.
Well, my hat's off to you on that one. Let's move forward a little bit. We now have this small batch Kentucky straight bourbon bottled and bond whiskey. It is batch 15G01. Is this the next one you all want to talk about? Or
yep.
What's the mash on this? What makes this different than the yellow label?
So, starting back, just kind of review of what was in the yellow label. That's, again, our wheated bourbon with 64 corn, 24 wheat, 12% malted barley. The small batch black label that we're referring to now, it's actually the same recipe as our wheated, but it has rye swapped out for the wheat. So it's got 24% rye instead of 24% wheat. So a great example of 2 different bourbons made at the same distillery from the same mash recipe. So, what is the difference between a wheater and a rye bourbon? This is, one of the only examples that I can think of where you've got 2 products made from the same distillery, from the same mash bill. And the only difference is one's got rye, one's got wheat. Another difference, they're both bottled in bond as well. Another difference between the 2 is that our wheated is a single barrel, and the other one, the rye bourbon, is a small batch. So we batch together 10 to 12 barrels at a time for that.
There's some pine on this. It almost has more rye characteristics.
Rye whiskey?
Yeah, than it does.
You grew up in Georgia, son.
And a bourbon.
Well, Zeke and I have opposite palates, so when it tingles my mouth, he's like, "This is really easy,"
John says pine, and I don't get any of it. And then I think, well, he didn't have to spend summers picking up pine cones on the front of the yard.
I did spend summers at a campground with the pine all around. It's not just a northern southern thing.
You dated a girl from Danville too, so
I did. I'm glad this is out on the podcast now, but yeah, I did date a girl from Danville. Great girl, very nice girl.
they're piney around there too. So
I got a little bit of pine. And what do you? Let's ask the expert. What do you get on this one?
I get I get a little bit of that coniferous type of
I like that word. You can tell this is a man who's very highly educated. What he's using, coniferous versus deciduous. That's
coniferous is another way of saying piney.
Yeah, I get like a pine nut, little small, little green nuts.
Juniper.
We call it pine
Yeah, you
nuts.
know all about small nuts.
A little small, like green seedling. They're smaller than a sunflower. They have like some trail mix or whatever. Isn't that a pine nut? That's something else.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Girl pine nuts, yeah.
Like I get that aspect of it, but I wouldn't call it piney by any means.
No, I mean, but I get a little bit of pine. Like there are hints of pine that are there, and I only call that out because it's not always. That's typically a rye note. That
Well, it's got rye in it. He said that.
I know, but no shit. But I'm just saying,
More like a rye whiskey as opposed to a rye bourbon.
yeah, this kind of drinks a little bit more to me than like what a Knob Creek rye would be. And I find there's a big difference between Kentucky rye and MGP rye, where that Kentucky rye is going to go half and half. Sometimes it tastes more like a bourbon. Sometimes it tastes more like a rye. I have a feeling that with this recipe for you all, some of these barrels come out tasting super bourbony. Some of them come out tasting super rye-like.
Yeah. And you know, some other comments about the rye that we use. You know, most Kentucky bourbon producers use rye in their recipe, but we're one of the only Kentucky distilleries that actually uses rye that was grown in Kentucky. And that's one reason why our rye whiskey and our rye bourbons are a year behind in maturation than are wheated, because it took us an extra year to get locally grown rye.
Oh.
So if you look at rye grown in other states versus rye grown in Kentucky, you know, just visually, immediately, you can kind of see why most distillers in Kentucky use rye grown outside of Kentucky. Because Kentucky rye looks to me more like what grass seed looks like.
Kentucky bluegrass.
You know, and rye that you get from other states is more plump. And now that being the case, when we took the Kentucky grown rye into the laboratory and started, you know, looking at checking all the boxes for, you know, what is this going to make a good whiskey? It checked all the boxes in terms of starch content, the ability to mill it and process it properly. We normally do have to dial down the speed at which we feed our rye into our milling system because it is a little more fibrous. But it makes great taste in whiskey. But that's one of the other things that might set ours apart from others that you've had is the fact we use Kentucky grown rye.
And a lot more rye in there too than others. Yeah.
It's like great taste, less filling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like Miller Lite.
Yeah.
Except we don't use any corn.
High fructose corn syrup.
Corn syrup, yep.
Heck, that's even better. Now the rye, I think it's a very traditional Kentucky rye.
The rye whiskey.
Yeah, the rye whiskey. Yeah. I think it's a very traditional. You know, I'm oversimplifying the notes here, knowing that we're pretty deep into this conversation now, and we gotta take some corners at some point. It's a very traditional rye whiskey. It's not going to be one of those 95.5 whiskeys that you kind of put in one box. I think there's enough variance here, and knowing the mash bill like I do now, this is one where it's like, hey, don't sleep on this. You're going to have to taste each batch and figure out which batches you really, really like. Thankfully, they have multiple batches, and you're going to find one that you like.
Well, single barrels too.
Yeah, all single barrels. There's going to be...
No, I mean, we tasted through, I think, 4 of these a couple weekends ago, and very distinct, noticeably different profiles, and that's where I laugh and enjoy rye the most is, like, generally speaking, bourbon, people kind of agree on. Wheaters, you get a little more variance, at least I do, because I just can't seem to like too many of them. But rye, man, you get all over the board. I mean, you put 5 people in a room, they taste 3 different ones. At least one person likes something that was somebody else's least favorite, etc. And to me, that's really what's fun. And you know, diving in and like, all right, what'd you like?
Yeah.
damn, you like that one? I thought we was friends. But I'm sure you see it. Going through all the barrels, and you thieve it out and you put it in the glass for whoever's around you, and just kind of watch and see what they all say. I guess.
Yeah. I watch. You gotta be careful walking in the middle of some of these barrel pits because a lot of times you're ending up being the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
It's like, there's these three people, each like these three individual. So which one do you think's the best? So you're getting ready to make one person very happy and piss two of them off. So
have you tried my high rye bourbon?
Yeah.
Somebody did something that was kind of nasty recently. We were at a Jack Daniels pick, and we were stuck on 2. And then what they ended up doing is they ended up taking the one that had the highest rating for the ones that we did like and put it up against the one that nobody liked. And it was almost like a test. Like, is anybody going to go after this one that nobody liked? Instead of like, you think the top 2 would have a showdown. They were like, no, it's going to be top 2 and choice number 3.
Yeah.
And pick which one you like better. So
at least it still flopped.
Yeah, at least we were very consistent. Yeah. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about, and you've mentioned it, is the expertise that you have. So you're talking to thousands of distilleries, which is really funny because probably when you started this, you were maybe talking 100 distilleries, a few hundred if we were lucky. But there's a huge disparity from where the number was then to where it is now. And it's something you've been working on a lot. Like, tell us a little bit about what you're doing almost on the firm solution side, right? Mm-hmm. To educate people, but also kind of consult people and get them to where the wilderness trail side is at the end of the day, right?
Yep. Let's see. On the firm solution side, so if you look at the number of distilleries we're doing business with today versus when we first started our distillery, we've done a lot of different training. That's how we get a lot of our customers, is get in front of them for training. Like, we do a lot of training at our facility. We engage in training at different universities. University of Kentucky, for example, they're starting up the Distilled Spirits Research Institute there, which we've been a part of.
I wish they did that a long time ago.
Yeah, they've got a beer, wine, and distilled spirits program there that we teach in, and I do a lot at Moonshine University there in Louisville. So since we started our distillery, coincidentally, we've gotten in front of a lot of people. And, I would guess that there's probably 100 distilleries that we're working with right now that probably won't be starting up for at least another year. So, just kind of looking at, training that we did last week, those accounts aren't going to come to fruition maybe for another couple of years. And then if you look, the training we were doing 2 or 3 years ago, that's business we're just now starting to get now. So it just kind of snowballs over time.
Yeah.
And then transitioning that over to, Wilderness Trail, how many other, if we look at just knowing a lot of other master distillers and people that run distilleries, we might engage in a day's time between Shane and I, or between us and our laboratory and our other technical staff. We might engage in 60 or more different, problem-solving scenarios in a day's time. Well, that might be more than a master distiller who spends their whole career at one distillery would see in their entire career. So on a day-to-day basis, we're seeing just lifetime's worth of issues, and then just over time you get kind of used to dealing. You hear buzzwords and oh wow, that's got to be bacterial contamination, or oh, this sounds like a grain quality issue, or this sounds like an enzymatic conversion issue, or this sounds like there might be a squirrel stuck in the recirculation line, or whatever. You just kind of get used to hearing, and then we sort of have our what questions do we ask based on what type of scenario were we present it with. Mm-hmm. So, that's pretty interesting as well.
I always kind of talk about it for my day job, right? A lot of what I do is find something that's scalable and repeatable. That's huge. And I told you before, one of the things I want to talk about is like everybody I talk to in Tennessee talks about how they went and talked to you. You are actually working individually with distilleries, helping them get going. I mean, a lot of the Tennessee Whiskey Trail can probably trace itself, but you are like the Bill Parcells or Bill Belichick of the whiskey world.
Yeah. And, not just me, my business partner, Shane, he's, it just depends on what.
It's okay. He didn't come down here, so we're going to say you. That's what you get for staying home, Shane.
Yeah, I'll be doing an event somewhere, and there'll be another alcohol beverage company there. Like, oh, hey, we get yeast from you guys at Firm Solutions. Like, oh, cool. And it's neat how widespread Shane and Pat are in the industry.
What do you really enjoy that? Is that the thing that kind of brings you pride in addition to your whiskey, obviously?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it definitely gives us a lot of pride. But also, it's just a kind of an empowered position, I mean, it gives us a lot of confidence as well in what we're doing. To have so many people that come to us and rely on us for information, it's just sort of, kind of warms the soul.
I don't even know.
It's always good to be wanted.
Oh, yeah.
Say that again, real.
It's always good to be wanted.
It's one of these things right now. I would want to talk to Pat for another 5 hours. I think we might have to talk to Pat again. But, if there's one thing, what is your favorite thing that you do? Because you do wear so many hats, and you have the yeast side, you have the whiskey side, and you have the education side.
My favorite thing to do is engage with an audience in an educational setting. Like the teaching that we do.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite thing to do, whether it be showing somebody around the distillery or up in front of a class. I really like the engagement. I really like the fact that we are so helpful to people. But that's probably my favorite part of it is that, sitting around in bars and drinking our stuff and engaging with people that way is also fun. But I really like that interactive kind of educational type of where somebody's really eager to learn about the process, and we have a lot of knowledge to give and can answer, most questions. So it's pretty cool.
My, final question I had logged in the mind was, simply with you guys are still pulling a solid yield on all the products, and it 200 plus barrels or 200 plus bottles,
255 on some of them.
Yeah, that's a bit of a I don't own a store obviously, but consumerism and that kind of thing. That's a bit of a yield to take on. Have you guys looked at a partial barrel pick type of program?
Yeah.
To where someone takes, a half barrel or so to speak.
Well, I think that's one of the cool things about our situation. We're pretty much in charge.
Yeah.
We can do whatever the hell we want because it's our damn distillery. And I think we do try to have as much flexibility as we can, because we want to make people happy and we want to be accommodating, and we have the power to do that. So, whether it come to, we do a little bit of contract production, for example. Mm-hmm. So we're not just going to say, hey, here's the 3 mash bills we make. Which one do you want? We have the flexibility of making batches of 10 barrels. We have fermenters that'll get us 60 barrel batches. So, do you want 10 barrels? And then what kind of mash bill do you want? And so, same when it comes to, just other day-to-day operations is, we try to be as flexible as we possibly can. And that's because we can be that way.
No, conclusion, damn the man.
Danville. We see a lot of folks, especially the crafts, and, they have good product, but sometimes more than a yield than I think some stores can take on, especially with not a familiar name. Mm-hmm. So then it's kind of harder for the store to sell. Whereas if they can come in all right, we'd love to taste through some barrels, but I can't commit to this barrel that's going to yield 200 plus bottles, but it's going to yield me 125, maybe 150. That's much more approachable and much more of a manageable sale from the store owner's side of things versus, no matter how good it is, if the yield is such amount, especially for, the craft and the names that aren't known, like the 3 or 4 big boys, it's just hard to move that much product or have that much of an investment, tied up, so to speak.
That's when I tell some stores that they need to partner up.
We see a lot of that partnering up and stuff, but one thing we offer our stores that they come in and do barrel pick is that the bottle and bond bourbons, which is the only way that that's publicly available. But if you come in and do a store pick, we offer our bottle and bond bourbons at barrel strength. So that does reduce the amount of barrels, increase the proof. But for us, we have such a low barrel entry proof of 110 proof on the bourbon. It doesn't change it that much, but you might go from 250 down to 220. But of course, every barrel being different, we've already had barrels yield as low as 99, I believe, Pat, if that's right.
Which that would be a leaky damn
Liquor.
Yeah. But still, though,
I didn't catch that one.
Yeah, but now out of 55-ish thousand barrels we have aging, there's bound to be those and stuff in there. So, and as we get older and inventory gets older, that yield will go down too. So,
And Jerod, I feel like we need to talk to you a whole lot more, and Dr. Pat, we need to talk to you a whole lot more.
Oh, Jerod had the damn whooping cough.
He
I
did.
did,
He left. He left.
I had a TB. I'm not sure either way I'm getting tested when I got it.
look, I quit smoking years ago, and it all came back tonight.
He went and copped up a hairball. There was something else that was out there, but one of the things that I just want to mention before we do close up, I want to thank you for what you've done with Fuck Cancer. It's a big, big thing, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up while you were here. I think for a lot of us, my kind started it. A lot of people have taken the banner from that. I know that this year marks the 2-year anniversary of my mother-in-law passing from cancer, and one of the things I did for my father-in-law was you guys really went above and beyond with the box and the glasses and everything you did, from picking a special barrel to it. I know I was super proud to be able to give my father-in-law that. I just want to applaud you guys for getting on top of that. I want to applaud you for having great whiskey, and we're just happy to have met you all tonight. I think we probably need a lot longer time to sit down and talk about stuff, so we look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll even get Mike involved. I mean, he goes to bed at 10 o'clock. So
well, I had dinner with Mike Hines earlier.
Which is why it's now 1 in the morning here, because you were with Mike Hines.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, like I said, he went to bed at 10 and then left us all
Well, I appreciate the kind words, though. That means a lot to us, that people are taking notice. And, in terms of the whole, cancer thing, that's something that affects us. We have family members that's been touched by it. We have employees right now that are being touched by it. And so it's definitely a great thing that we're behind 100%.
Yeah, shout out to Denise at the distillery. Pat and Shane have really taken the mantle of Fuck Cancer. And like you said, everybody knows somebody that's been touched by it. So what a more of a noble cause could you have,
Yeah. I know it's one for me. It's anytime that comes up, I always tell the story. While my mother-in-law was kind of passing and going through that whole thing, my mom got diagnosed at the same time. She's since in remission, but it was like one of those things that really hit the family on both ends really hard. And anytime I see anything to do with cancer, something that's near and dear to my heart, I want to make sure that I'm reaching out and doing whatever I can for charities that are supporting that. But from you guys, it means a lot. Plus, it's a really freaking good bottle, and that makes it super easy when you have to pay a little bit extra for those bottles because it's going to charity. I know that you guys, Pat, you and Shane went and made sure that you picked a great bottle of Wilderness Trail. So thank you for that. And that rye is super good. You guys got to come back.
Yep.
We got to do more together.
Yeah. This will be the introduction to part 1 of a 10-part series.
I feel like
John will wear his green check shirt with his green shoelaces in his boots.
If I had green shoelaces, but I would love to do one of those Moonshine University classes or something, in podcast.
Got a 16-hour one coming up.
I would love.
You'd ask too many damn questions. They'd kick your ass out.
No, we like questions.
You're done.
Jerod, come back when Pat's not here hogging the microphone.
Yeah, man. No. I'm just a reflection of what we do there. You know, what we do at Wilderness Trail is not bullshit. It's all authentic, and that's why we can be as good as we are. Because Pat can tell the story, I can tell the story, Shane can tell the story. 'Cause it's the same story. You know, we don't have to rely on what some narrative that some marketing guy came up with. You know, so I'm happy just to sit back and I love listening to Pat talk. Man, Pat's a great speaker. So thanks for having us here, man. It's been great. Thanks for sharing your liquor with us too, man. This has been an awesome night.
Hey, not a problem. Pat spoken class today.
Down in the back, big one.
Pat, thank you so much for coming on. It has been a pleasure having you, and can't wait to have you again.
Thank you.
Hey, who knew our sweet mash whiskey was good?
After 16 hours of Pat, you might be like Jeremy. I don't know.
Not at all. Where can the folks find Wilderness Trail?
You can find us anywhere right now. So assuming people listen to all over the world, we're spreading out. Right now, we're in 11 states, getting ready to add 6 more. So if it's not in your state, it's within the next state. You'll be able to find us through different stuff, through charity stuff like with Cask Cartel. You'll find us at different online outlets. And if you don't have us in your state or in your locality, ask for us. You know, put the pressure on. We want to be there. So
And y'all are at Wilderness Trail on Instagram, Facebook, all that.
As well as www.KentuckyStraightBourbon.com.
that's right.
That is, how long ago did you buy that one?
I'll take the credit for that.
Yeah.
So
Sleep at the wheel that day.
So some dude, I watched some guy for 3 months, got onto the web domain registration,
Yeah.
right? And as soon as it popped up, I let Shane know, and we snagged it that day. So KentuckyStraightBourbon.com is ours, and rightfully so, because we're carrying on that tradition. That's 200 years old of Kentucky Straight
That
Bourbon.
guy probably would have charged you like $2,000 for
Oh, hell
it
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Or he'd be like, "Hey, you got any Pappy?"
Yeah, don't-
And you'd be like, "Surprisingly enough, there's some people that used to work at Stitzelwell or we're connected with."
Yesterday's price was $2,000. Today, it's free.
Right, that's right, man.
Well, anyways, you can find the dads on Facebook at Dads Drinking Bourbon, Twitter at Bourbon Dads, Instagram at Dads Drinking Bourbon. Find us on wherever you listen to your podcast, whatever it is, we are on it. Please leave us an open and honest review like we leave open and honest reviews about the whiskey we drink. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Jerod. We really, really appreciated this. This was a pleasure. Zeke, where else can the folks find us?
Music City, USA.
Cheers. Ciao.